I am not saying that. I do not want to be sued, but that is something other people are saying.
Like people with
Um,
inside info
Now we
in.
know that, I mean, the government is alleging that there was a special forces soldier who was aware of the plans to capture Maduro, opened up a Polymarket account and made $400,000 trading on that. Probably thought he was gonna get away with it for a second, but is now extremely, been apprehended.
Hey everyone, from KQED in San Francisco, this is Political Breakdown. I'm Marisa Lagos.
And I'm Scott Shafer. Today on The Breakdown, online prediction markets have exploded in recent years, with people using sites like Kalshi and Polymarket to guess which team will win a game, which politician will win an election, and even what will happen in an armed conflict.
Today we're going to dig into why these markets are being allowed to flourish, even in states where gambling is illegal, and how they're changing government and politics. In a bit, we'll be joined by Kate Knibbs, who has been following the industry for Wired. But joining us first is our resident expert on this issue, KQED politics correspondent Guy Marzorati.
Hi, Bar. Hello. Thank you for having
Guy.
me.
Well, I mean, I'll out you. It's partly because you're a sports fan, and these have really exploded in the sports market. But we want to talk a little bit more. First of all, can you just explain briefly, like, what is a prediction market?
Yeah, maybe the best way to describe it, it's a marketplace where you can buy and sell. You can trade on the outcome of real world events. So that could be anything. I mean, there's so much stuff on there. That could be anything from sporting events, as we'll talk about politics. But it functions.
The weather?
Yeah, it functions more like a stock market than a traditional bet that if you went to Vegas and bet on sports. So, Scott, for example, I know you're a long-suffering Buffalo Bills fan, years of billable hours in therapy for that. But you could bet on the Bills winning the Super Bowl next year. You could place a wager on Kalshi, but you'd basically be getting that position, right? So there's like a 7% odds holding that. Let's say next year, they make it to the AFC title game. They're right at the doorstep. Those odds are going to go up. You could sell your position even before the Super Bowl happens. So in that way, it's working.
That would be the best time to sell. It's the Bills.
In that way, it's working, a little bit more like a stock market than if you were to go to Vegas and bet on sports.
Got it.
Yeah. So how is it different from just like sort of conventional wisdom? Are people basically betting on what they think other people are going to do?
That's an interesting way to think about it. So I guess conventional wisdom, that's another good point, right? So if you're betting on sports, it's set by a bookie or by a sports book, right? And they have their own research. They're trying to set the odds in a way that advantages them. In this case, it's set by the public, like it's a marketplace. So if you're looking at that as kind of the conventional wisdom of people participating on Kalshi, you're trying to find, okay, well, where can I get something that is maybe mispriced in this market, whether, again, that's sports, politics, or anything else.
Yeah, and we'll get to this after the break. California allows some gambling, but not as much as other states. We have tribal casinos, state-run lottery, horse betting, charitable gaming, and sports betting is regulated at the state level. We did reject a measure to legalize that here. So this is kind of operating in this gray zone, right? But it's operating. And so I want to ask you, like, what are we seeing when it comes to politics? How are they playing in California? Is it just the governor's race mostly?
Yeah, the governor's race, certainly. I mean, I was just looking today, the Kalshi market for California governor is up to $28 million of people wagering or participating in that. But as you know, it is a fascinating gray area. We just had this whole campaign in 2022 about sports betting, where you had, DraftKings, FanDuel, tribal governments in the state spending well over $100 million to debate whether or not that should be legal. Those got rejected. And yet here we are just a few years later, and basically something that's very akin to being able to wager is used by many people in California. And so, of course, you've seen a lot of the tribal governments say, okay, they've filed suit. They're really upset about how all this has played out because it is operating in a gray area that's separate from the rules around casinos and betting, which are very strictly regulated in California.
I remember the day that all the news broke about Eric Swalwell. We're literally looking at Kalshi, and you could see it dropping, his chances of winning dropping by the minute, it seemed. But how are campaigns responding to, this now being out there in the mainstream, people talking about what the prediction markets are saying?
I mean, that's been something fascinating with this election, is watching it kind of delve into kind of the way the campaign has played out. You've seen campaigns tout, oh, we're up on Kalshi, we're, as if it was a poll. And you're even seeing that go into like media coverage of politics. Right now, when you watch CNN, oftentimes they'll have the poll And then they'll have, okay, well, here's what the Kalshi market says about who's likely to take the House in November. So that brings up a whole host of interesting issues because at the end of the day, it is kind of like self-reinforcing in some ways, right? That people are participating could also be voters. You get into a lot of thorny questions about what campaigns can do and not do about participating in the market. And then from a media standpoint, I think it raises a lot of fascinating issues. Like, are there data points? Is there something we can learn from markets that we're not learning from polls? And what is it not telling us as we're seeing, as you noted, Eric Swalwell, the minute he jumped into in the race for California governor, he was far and above leading on Kalshi, even though polls were showing a really crowded field. What was that telling us that surveys weren't?
Well, and also like how right, to your point, like this is it a self-fulfilling prophecy? Is it a feedback loop? Like Tom Steyer's still the favorite to win in that what would you even call it? Not bet, but in that
In the market,
market. And yet Javier Becerra is really surging in both polls and in this market, but hasn't overtaken him, even though I think a lot of political insiders see Becerra as kind of the front horse at this point.
Yeah, I mean, and that's what the interesting thing about Swalwell was like, okay, if we gave any person really following California politics in March kind of truth serum, I think a lot of people would have said they would have picked Swalwell to win. That was not reflected in the actual surveys of voters. He was leading, in some cases kind of tied, bunched up, but it was this feeling of kind of like, okay, we think other people will think he's the candidate to pick, right? And there's a weird psychology to that's interesting. Also, just to say, like, there's nothing new under the sun. Like, I actually brought a little show and tell here, take you back in history. The ways in which this was being used in political media. What I have here is the front page of the Mercury News on Election Day, 1934. The race for California governor.
Comes with homework.
Yes, this is a little show and tell here. I put it in the chat, Scott. You can check this out. The 1934 race for governor, to me, one of the greatest races for governor in California history. It's in my top 3. It's probably in yours as well. Frank Merriam, Upton Sinclair. But look at the headline, Election Day in the Mercury News.
There are the odds.
Merriam 3-1 favorite. So there, and remember, public polling, the field poll in California doesn't come out to the 40s.
Right.
So
this was the only way to predict.
Yeah,
probably.
This is newspapers basically looking at betting lines as a way to cover politics.
Wow.
Now, again, there's differences. They're relying on bookies who are ostensibly getting inside information, but it's so fascinating. We're 100 years later coming full circle and having basically these marketplaces be data points, and they're not. There's a lot wrong with them as data points, but it was interesting. You go back 20s, 30s in California politics, a lot of the journalism and the coverage is relying on those kind of betting markets to kind of give people a sense of where the race stands.
This kind of reminds me of the wisdom of crowds, that Malcolm Gladwell wrote about it. And this has been these, prediction markets have been around for a while. And I seem to remember at the end of 2024, just before the election, it had Trump slightly ahead of Kamala Harris. And the same in 2016 with Hillary and Trump. Trump was ahead, I think. So, but my question is, like, what is the track record? How accurate, are these things as you get close to an election? Do we have enough data?
Yeah, I don't. I'm not sure. That is a fascinating question. Like, and comparing that, I mean, that's honestly what interested me about the whole Swalwell thing. It was like, okay, let's say the scandal happened, this all went out anyway. But like, if he won, there was something that the prediction market was telling us that polls weren't. And what was that?
Yeah.
And I can't really put my finger on what that is. But I do think this will be something that kind of sticks in politics and it'll be worth sorting out. There's also a lot of stuff that can be easily manipulated, right? Like, this is the regulation, as I'm sure you'll talk about, is very different than gambling, other things. And Kalshi itself has tried to like self-police. They've thrown candidates off who have bet on themselves. You remember earlier in this race, Stephen Klubeck, who was briefly running for governor, then he was a big donor to Eric Swalwell. He was thrown off of the market because he was betting on Swalwell. So it raises this question of like, okay, if this becomes more of a data point for media, well, what if campaigns start telling their supporters, you know what, max out to me, and then also give 2,000 to me on bet on me on Kalshi.
Bet on me, yeah.
Basically, you'll
Juice
be
it.
juicing a poll
Yeah.
in some sense. So yeah, I think there's a lot to kind of sort out as this becomes more and more popular.
Yeah, and we're going to talk to Kate in a second about how states and the federal government are responding. But I think we already heard the speaker of the assembly here sort of allude to the fact that he would like to maybe jump in and regulate these. So, Guy Marzorati, thank you for coming. Thank you for bringing this wonderful throwback.
Yes, nothing
Upton
new under the
Sinclair.
sun.
I don't
That's
think
a great
we've
for everyone. Please check out the 1934 race for governor. There's actually a lot of similarities, I feel like, to this year. You can dig in. Maybe we'll do a special episode at some point. It's
Our
up there
history
as one of the
buff.
greatest. So yeah.
All right, Guy Marzorati, thanks for coming in. We're going to take a short break. When we come back, senior Wired writer Kate Knibbs will join us. You're listening to Political Breakdown from KQED News. Welcome back to Political Breakdown. I'm Marisa Lagos here with Scott Shafer. Today we're joined by Kate Knibbs. She is a senior writer at Wired, where she covers prediction markets, the future of media, and how AI is changing the internet. Welcome, Kate.
Thanks so much for having me.
Well, thanks for being here. And we got a lot for you to kind of sort out here. So we've been talking, obviously, about these prediction markets. Can you just give us a little history? Like, how long have they been around? Not since 1934, because the internet did not exist then. But yeah, who created them?
Okay, so interesting that you say that because, the markets position themselves as financial instruments that, are part of the lineage of commodities trading. So if you go by their definition, then they have been around that long. Um, there have been prediction markets, though, for decades. They've just really been niche hobbyist pursuits, usually initiated by academic centers. There's one in Iowa that's been going on for a few decades, specifically centered around politics. It's only been in the past handful of years that they've really taken off, and only the past 2 years that they've gone mainstream.
Okay.
The two leading markets, Polymarket and Kalshi, they were introduced within the past 5 years, and since the Trump administration took office, have really exploded in popularity because they've been able to introduce sports contracts, and that has attracted a whole new audience
Right.
of participants.
Huh.
So, been around for maybe longer than you would think, but the mainstreaming of these platforms is new.
And how do people decide what you can bet on? I mean, can you propose a question
Yeah.
or an event or whatever, or do you have to choose from what's available?
Yeah, so every market has different policies, but in both Kalshi and Polymarket, users are able to suggest markets that they want to trade on, and they have different processes for deciding whether they're appropriate. So Kalshi, since it's based in the US and it's fully attempting to abide by federal regulations, it won't allow markets on something like assassination, death, war. Polymarket does have a US based component that's limited, but the larger Polymarket platform is decentralized and offshore. And so it doesn't really have to abide by the regulations
Mm.
to the same extent that Kalshi does. And people in the United States are actually not supposed to be participating on that market at all. It's banned in a lot of countries, including the US right now. And so people who are participating in most of Polymarket from within the US are doing so by using a virtual private network and essentially sneaking on it.
Interesting.
So yeah, that was a long-winded way of it saying, yes, you can propose markets,
Yeah.
but it has to go through an approval process.
That's so fascinating. So beyond war and death, what's like the craziest thing you've seen a bet on?
Ooh, good question.
Or like unexpected, maybe?
So I didn't really realize how active people were. There are all of these different markets about crypto that are really granular. Like there
Mm.
are markets about the price of Bitcoin in 5-minute increments. And they've got a lot of volume. Like there are a lot of people and I think institutions really trading on those markets already and doing so in a way that really does feel closer to like a financial situation than just, sports betting or something like that.
Say a little bit more about the legality. Like, what, if any, are the federal or state laws that govern them? I mean, is it treated as gambling essentially in some states or by the federal government?
There's a huge fight about this ongoing right now, so that is a tricky question to answer in a straightforward way. There are, like, over 50 lawsuits flying around between states and leading prediction market platforms. I suspect that this is a question that will eventually be, considered by the Supreme Court. Right now, the federal government considers these to be financial instruments that are regulated by the Commodity Futures Trading Commission, the CFTC. That is the stance of the federal government. States beg to differ, including California, I believe, and there are a bunch of different states that have sued Kalshi and other platforms that are offering trading, and they're arguing that they're actually offering illegal gambling and that they should either have to abide by state gambling laws, or in states where it's gambling is banned, like California, just get out.
Right.
And so it's a big legal mess. Interestingly, the fight doesn't really break down along clean party lines. There are Republicans that are really in favor of prediction markets, and there are Republicans that are really opposed. And it's all up in the air. I don't even know how I would bet on it.
So the Trump administration has been pretty friendly to these markets, which are being essentially regulated by the same body that regulates like the stock market, right? Financial markets right now. Why do we think the Trump administration is so friendly? And is there any sort of financial ties between his family and these markets?
There are a number of financial ties between the Trump family and these markets. Donald Trump Jr. is involved with both Kalshi and Polymarket. He's a paid advisor to Kalshi, and he's an investor in Polymarket. The Trump administration, you know, Trump did just recently come out seeming kind of wistful about the existence of these prediction markets. So he wasn't coming out and saying, I love them.
Mm.
But thus far, they're taking a very laissez-faire approach to regulation. The CFTC is insisting that it has exclusive jurisdiction over these markets and is actually suing some states, um, saying, get out of our way. Like, you
Mm.
should not be attempting to make these prediction markets abide by your state gambling laws. We're in charge. Um, but then not really doing that much to enforce laws that exist, to put guardrails up in how these prediction markets work. We just saw the first arrest for insider trading last week. Was it last week? Recently. I think that there will be a lot more, but for a while, people were sitting here wondering, are they ever going to do anything? Because it was very obvious that there was insider trading going on.
Well, say a little bit
Um,
more about that. What was the
What?
case
Yeah.
where?
What does
Yeah.
that mean in this case? Yeah.
yes. Okay. So Polymarket, because it's crypto based, you can see the activity, you can see the trades. It's all public. You can't see who owns the wallets that are making the trades, but you can see how they are trading. And so there have been several instances where very, very suspicious behaviors were pointed out by Bitcoin analysts, crypto analysts, and just people who are interested, where like wallets would be opened right before a major geopolitical event, like the capture of Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro, or missile strikes in the Iran war. They would make trades that were sort of out of left field at the time. Like, we didn't know that Maduro was going to be captured before he was. So someone putting hundreds of thousands of dollars on he's going to be out is odd. And then never doing anything again, closing the accounts. And there's been a lot of speculation about who has been behind those maneuvers. Some uh, lawmakers have come out and said that they think the Trump administration is involved. I am not saying that. I do not want to be sued, but that is something other people are saying.
Like people with
Um,
inside info
no, we
in.
know that. I mean, the government is alleging that there was a special forces soldier who was aware of the plans to capture Maduro, opened up a Polymarket account, and made $400,000 trading on that. Probably thought he was going to get away with it for a second, but is now extremely been apprehended.
Do you know
So
how he got caught?
So the complaint doesn't go into too much detail, but it appears that he didn't do a good enough job obscuring his identity. Like if he had been a little bit more savvy, he would have set up a bunch of different layers to obfuscate any ties
Mm.
between like his personal identity and the crypto accounts that he was using. So we'll find out more, I'm sure,
Yeah.
as if there's a trial, but right now it seems like maybe it was just a rookie mistake because it
Yeah.
wasn't like he was some super sophisticated crypto trader.
Yeah, it seems like maybe if he had made more trades too, that would have raised less flags. So, okay, so obviously, if you bet and you win, you make money, or if you predict and you win. But who else is getting rich on this? Like, is it Kalshi and this? I assume they have a board and stakeholders in the company.
So both companies have really sky high valuations right now. They're both private, so I don't know their exact revenue figures or profit or anything like that, but their valuations are jaw dropping. They are making money. They take fees on each transaction. So it isn't like gambling where the house wins. It's supposed to be more peer to peer. Although there's been a lot of research coming out recently that indicates that a lot of the accounts that are profiting off of these prediction markets are um, savvy players that are within the financial industry. You have quant traders looking for arbitrage opportunities on platforms like Kalshi. There are a lot of bots making automated
Oh,
trades that are
interesting.
owned by people who are very active in more traditional commodities trading. So a lot of the big winners here are people who are already the big winners elsewhere, like a retail regular person who just thinks, I'll put $100 on Eric Swalwell, is not going to walk away with a fortune. Yeah.
It, I think Arizona just filed a criminal suit. Can you say more about that? Like, what is it based on, and how has Kalshi responded, if at all?
Yeah, so Arizona, criminally charged Kalshi, misdemeanors, so it's not like they're gonna go and attempt to lock up the CEO or anything like that, but it's part of this push by the states, saying, "This is illegal gambling. We do not condone this. We do not think you should be allowed to do this." Most states have been filing lawsuits, but Arizona took a slightly different tactic and just straight up, put forth criminal charges. Kalshi is obviously pushing back on this, and they have what seems to be a very well appointed legal team, and they also right now have the federal government on their side. So it's going to be a tough fight between the states on one side and the platforms and the federal government on the other.
Yeah. So you brought up, the capture of Nicolas Maduro being on these prediction markets, the war in Iran. Tell us the story of Emmanuel Fabian from the Times of Israel, because I think that really encapsulates kind of how crazy this story has gotten. And people have bet like hundreds of millions of dollars on this war.
Yes. Oh my gosh, that story is wild, and as a journalist,
Yeah.
scary. So there was a reporter, working for an Israeli outlet who had been reporting on the war in Iran, and the way that he worded something in his story meant that a market was resolved in a way that angered a lot of different Polymarket traders who had put their money on whatever the other outcome was. It was about a missile strike. I'm not sure about
It was like a missile
what
strike
went
versus a
wrong.
shard versus, yeah, like how
Yes.
serious was the strike?
So the reporter did not do anything wrong. It's not like he had to issue a correction. Like, he did his job. Still, because his reporting had been used to resolve this market in a way that these traders didn't want it resolved, there was a harassment campaign against this poor guy. They were threatening his life, saying, "You better change your story," because they didn't want to lose money. And I really don't think that's the last that we'll hear of something like this happening, just because it's reminiscent of the way that since sports betting has been legalized, a lot of different athletes have been threatened by
Mm.
sports bettors, for performing better or worse than they anticipated. Most of these markets will resolve. There'll be an element where news reporting will factor into how they're resolved. Um, and so it just opens journalists up to a new vector of abuse, and it's really troubling.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we should say that was about they wanted him to say it was a fragment of a missile instead of a missile, whole missile. And yeah, people are losing a lot of money. Go ahead, Scott.
Just like pivoting to sports, like how do these sites differ from traditional sports betting?
So the way that they're structured is different. Like you or me, it doesn't really make that much of a difference if I'm going to put $5 on who's going to win the Super Bowl via FanDuel or Kalshi. I'm probably going to lose on both because I'm not good at betting. Um, but the structure is different. Like a traditional sports book, there is a house that sets the odds. Prediction markets are peer to peer. And so rather than Kalshi setting the odds, the odds will be determined based on, the participants in the market. It's not quite as clean cut as that actually, because they're like Kalshi does sometimes function as a market maker for itself, and there are other institutions functioning as market makers that provide liquidity. That's a little in the weeds.
Yeah.
So like the bottom line is sportsbooks have a house, prediction markets don't.
And
Um,
how are sports responding? I was surprised to see like Major League Baseball struck a deal with Kalshi.
Oh yeah, a bunch of different professional sports leagues have struck deals with Kalshi and Polymarket, and there are different, you know, professional athletes who are now coming out and endorsing these platforms and openly participating on them. It seems like I don't know if they're thinking it's inevitable and they might as well
Mm.
hop on the bandwagon. I would love to talk to the commissioners of these leagues about that at some point. But the prediction markets have been very savvy at doing everything they can to entrench themselves, develop relationships with institutions. It's sort of like the Uber approach where there's these regulatory fights going on, and the company is just focused on making itself so hard to get rid of without a fight. Um,
Yeah.
so I think we're also going to see more sports leagues striking partnerships.
So fascinating.
Okay, we're getting short on time, but what are you going to be looking for with all these lawsuits flying around and talk of regulation, and we're getting close to elections? I mean, what are you watching for?
I mean, the insider trading storyline is fascinating and deeply disturbing, and I think deserves even more attention than it's already getting. And as the election approaches, I'm definitely going to be watching for instances of market manipulation. I'm very interested personally in how like the media and the prediction market space is
Mm.
coalescing. And there are all these partnerships that are being struck. I think that in the next year we're going to see prediction markets launched by media companies. So I have my eye on that, and I will not be placing my own bets. I'll say that.
We'll leave it to that.
Uh, but yeah, insider trading, media. I do think that they are useful signals, as you guys were talking
Yeah.
about earlier, into they do provide insight into who's going to win elections. So I will be watching them as a forecasting signal. They're flawed, but they're useful.
All right.
And then I'm sure a bunch of stuff will happen that I
Right.
can't even begin to imagine.
Wars and all the rest. Kate Knibbs from Wired, thank you so much for your time today.
Of course.
That's going to be a wrap for Thursday, April 30th. Political Breakdowns, a production of KQED.
Our engineer today is Jim Bennett. Our producer is Izzy Bloom. Our video team includes Alex Tran, Jim McKee, Matt Morales, Jalar Zeta, and Vivian Morales. I'm Scott Shafer.
I'm Marisa Lagos. We'll see you next time.